Have you ever wondered why an entire city would choose to live inside a cliff, and then walk away from it without a trace? More than 700 years ago, in what is now the American Southwest, a civilization carved its existence into the living stone of a vast canyon. Not to conquer the landscape, but to belong to it. This is Mesa Verde National Park, a place where architecture is not about power, but about survival and memory. The Ancestral Pueblo people arrived here around the year 550. At first, their homes stood on the mesa tops above the canyons. They were farmers, growing corn, beans, and squash in carefully tended fields. They followed the seasons, watched the sky, and built communities rooted in cooperation. For centuries, life continued on the open land. And then, in the late 1100s, something extraordinary happened. They began to move into the cliffs. Not in fear, not in haste, but with intention. Stone by stone, using sandstone shaped by hand and mortar made from earth and water, they built entire villages beneath the rock overhangs. What you see today is not a collection of shelters. It is a masterpiece of environmental design. The largest of them all, Cliff Palace, holds more than 150 rooms and 23 kivas. The kivas were not ordinary spaces. They were ceremonial chambers, circular, carefully aligned, entered from above. They were the spiritual heart of the community, where stories were told, rituals were performed, and identity was shared. These dwellings were engineered with remarkable intelligence. They faced south to capture the low winter sun. The great cliff above acted as a natural shield, creating shade and cool air in the summer. Storage rooms were designed to preserve food through years of drought. This was architecture in dialogue with climate. Every wall still carries the fingerprints of its builders. At its height in the 1200s, this canyon was home to several thousand people. Families lived in connected rooms. Children played in the open plazas. Each morning, thin columns of smoke rose from rooftop hearths into the clear desert air. Life here required effort. Water had to be carried up from the canyon floor. Crops had to be grown on the mesa top and brought down along narrow paths carved into the rock. But this was not a life defined by hardship. It was a life rich in meaning. Turquoise jewelry caught the sunlight. Pottery was painted with geometric precision, each pattern a language of belonging. Cotton textiles were woven with a skill so refined they still astonish modern researchers. Beauty was not a luxury. It was part of survival. And then, in the late 13th century, the cities were abandoned. Not destroyed, not burned, not conquered. Simply, left behind. The rooms remained intact. Kiva's silent, the doorways still opening to the same horizon. Archaeology tells us this was not a single moment, but a process. A prolonged drought that lasted decades. Pressure on farmland and forests. Changes in social and spiritual life. So the people moved. They traveled south and east, becoming the ancestors of today's Pueblo communities, who still carry their traditions, languages, and ceremonies forward. The story did not end. It transformed. For nearly 600 years, the cliff dwellings remained hidden from the outside world. Wind moved through the empty rooms. Seasons passed across the stone. The canyon kept its memory. In 1888, two cowboys searching for lost cattle followed a trail into the cliffs, and suddenly found themselves standing before an entire city carved into the rock. What they had discovered was one of the best preserved archaeological landscapes in North America. Today, Mesa Verde is protected as a national park and recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But statistics cannot explain what you feel when you stand here. Because beyond the numbers, this is a human place. These walls were built by hands that carried children, hands that prepared food, hands that held one another in moments of grief and celebration. The same sunset that touches the canyon today once touched their faces. Mesa Verde is not a ruin. It is a memory written in architecture. It reminds us that survival can be an art, that community can be stronger than stone, and that leaving a place does not mean it is forgotten. It lives on in descendants, in stories, in the quiet endurance of these walls. And perhaps that is why this place feels so alive. Not because people still live here, but because their presence never truly left. Thank you for traveling through time with us. If this journey moved you, subscribe and continue exploring the world's greatest civilizations, not as distant history, but as living human stories. Because the next memory in stone is already waiting. Herb.